Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're blessed to be joined by my friend Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News to talk with us about church news and current events in light of church teaching. One of the things I want to draw to your attention, we'll cover this to some degree, is the story of Marc Fogel. Now, Marc Fogel's family has been praying the rosary and, with his faith, sustained them through his detainment in Russia. Marc is an American school teacher. He has now returned to the United States after being detained in Russia for more than 3 years. He shared his story with EWTN News about how devotion to the Holy Rosary sustained them. His mother, Malphine, pulled out every stop for the sake of fighting for the freedom of her son. Now, Marc was incarcerated in Moscow. He was detained at Moscow's Sheremetyevo International Airport after trying to enter the country with just under an ounce of marijuana in his bag. Now, he'd been using this with medicated purposes. He was trying to treat back pain, but he was incarcerated under the auspices of bringing drugs into the country with the hopes of selling it to students. And because he had a teaching job at the Anglo-American School of Moscow, he was charged. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. 3 years later, thankfully, he's been released and now been brought home. His mother never wavered. She labored greatly for the freedom of her son, even going so far as to seek out the support and audience with President Donald Trump. So we'll talk about that. I just wanted to give you some context about the story because we won't be able to cover too much of it later. After that, we speak with my friend Steve Ray. We're going to be talking about a day in the life of the Holy Family of Nazareth, because the Church's devotion for the month of February is the Holy Family, the boyhood of Jesus Christ. And these are crucial elements for those of us who are in families, and that's all of us, to claim the blessing of the Holy Family, to claim the intercession of the Holy Family, and that they can call forth divine grace for us to live out a model of holy family living here on earth. Because God has designed the family on earth to mirror his own Trinitarian intimacy and to be our vehicle, our sacramental reality, to heaven. And we talk about all of this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Thursday, February 13th. It's the feast of St. Catherine de' Ricci. Today's news is brought to you by Visiting Angels, providing loving care and assistance for seniors in need at visitingangels.com. President Trump is ordering reciprocal tariffs. He said the latest tariffs will charge countries what they charge the U.S. and spoke about waivers when he made the announcement.
I don't expect that, no. This is a simple system, and there wouldn't be any. And in the case of Apple, I gave them a waiver, an exemption in my first term because Samsung was in South Korea.
The president said prices for some items could go up, but ultimately will come down. In what German authorities are calling a suspected attack, a car drove into a crowd of people in Munich earlier today.
Police say they have, quote, secured the driver on the scene, a 24-year-old Afghan man who was known to police in relation to drug and theft incidents.
The incident comes one day before Vice President J.D. Vance joins other world leaders in Munich for a security conference. The Trump administration says it's planning face-to-face talks with Russia on ending the war in Ukraine. NBC's Ralph Sanchez reports the news comes after President Trump wrapped up separate phone calls with the Russian and Ukrainian presidents.
Ukraine suffering a 1-2 punch at the hands of the Trump administration, with President Trump speaking to Vladimir Putin of Russia before speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, also inviting Putin to the White House. That is not an invitation he extended to the Ukrainian president.
At a NATO headquarters meeting, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Ukraine needs to abandon the goal of recovering all the territory it has lost to Russia since 2014. He also said the idea of NATO membership for Ukraine is not realistic. Hamas has agreed to release Israeli hostages this weekend as originally planned. Hamas had postponed this weekend's hostage release after accusing Israel of violating the truce by not allowing aid supplies into Gaza. 3 hostages are scheduled to be released. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. As we always do, every week we have my friend Dr. Matthew Bunson join us to talk about current events in light of church teachings and church news. Matthew is Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, thank you very, very much for joining us. How are you?
Oh, great to be with you.
So, quite a few things to talk about pertaining to Pope Francis, huh?
Yes, as always.
As always. So, let's start with the appointments of the new bishops. And for those of us here at Ave Maria Radio, there's a particular area of interest here with the Archdiocese of Detroit. So, what can we look forward to with the appointment of these bishops?
Well, collectively, what we're starting to see is playing out what you and I have been talking about for some time, and that is that we had a large number of dioceses and archdioceses across the United States whose bishops were either turning 75 or had turned 75. The technical term is that their positions as bishops were superannuated. In other words, they had sort of passed the age of 75 and they had to submit their letter of resignation.
Right.
So what we're seeing in many ways is something that we'd anticipated, and that is that systematically they're starting to fill in these different dioceses and archdioceses, and so that's taking the normal course. What is interesting is, as is always the case with appointments like this, is who the Holy Father ultimately decides to choose for these different positions, these different archdioceses and dioceses. Because typically, as you know, the Holy Father receives 3 names. It's called a terna.
Yeah.
And he chooses the one from that group. That's typically how it's done. Now, the Holy Father, if he has a candidate in mind, he can simply bypass that whole process and simply appoint this person.
Yep.
Rumors are that he's done that on a fairly regular basis. So
yeah, we had rumors about John Paul and Benedict doing similar things a few times.
Exactly. So this isn't, and there's nothing remotely out of the ordinary.
Yep.
And in that sense, then, this is a process that will always unfold as the Holy Father appoints bishops and archbishops.
Yep.
Where this gets interesting, though, is that sometimes, and this is especially true with Francis, that you'll have appointments that are unexpected. We saw that with Archbishop Henning, I think, in Boston. His name had not really circulated as a possible replacement to Cardinal Sean O'Malley. And this time, with the appointment of the Bishop of Tucson, Edward Weisenberger, as the new Archbishop of Detroit, the Holy Father accepting the resignation of Archbishop Alan Vigneron, of course, who'd been serving there for a long time. And that's precisely, I think, you're talking about, that for listeners to Ave Maria, listeners to Ave Maria around the United States, Archbishop Vigneron is a very well-known figure in the American Church. I would guess that Archbishop-elect Weisenberger is not that well known. But I think this is an opportunity for him to be much better known in this position.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, Archbishop Alan Vigneron is not only well known, he's well loved. He's done a tremendous amount of work with the revitalization of evangelization efforts in Detroit. That campaign that he's drawn, that's become the theme of the Archdiocese, which is unleashing the gospel. It's taken the entire Archdiocese by storm, and it's become a hallmark of his apostolate.
That's exactly right. And so what we're going to see now is, this is exactly the way it always works, that you'll have a new archbishop who will come in, and the faithful in the archdiocese will get to know his personality, some of his priorities, how he makes decisions. That's always the case. And in the situation regarding Bishop Weisenberger, so he was born in 1960. He went to seminary college in Missouri, studied at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium, and has multiple degrees in religious studies and theology, and a licentiate in canon law. Interestingly, not from Catholic University of America, but the University of St. Paul in Ottawa, Canada, because there are two places in North America where you can actually get canon law degrees, one in the U.S. at Catholic U and the other in St. Paul's. Both are ecclesiastical faculties and everything else. So his time has been very much in the areas of diocesan tribunals, and of course he was a priest for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and was also, that's important, because he was on site for the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995.
Oh, wow.
So he has lived through what can be a great crisis for a local church. And, of course, he also did a number of years in prison ministry. So this is somebody, I think, who has a very long and pastoral experience, right up until he was appointed Bishop of Salina, Kansas, in 2012 by Pope Benedict XVI. So, again, he wasn't sort of plucked out of obscurity by any means, but probably somebody who's not quite as well known. And he has had some things to say, for example, about immigration, serving as he does on the USCCB committee on migration and the subcommittee for the Catholic Communications Campaign.
And, in fact, that creates a good pivot. I guess before we switch topics, what can we look forward to the other candidates who have been elected bishop?
Well, for that group, we're again seeing Pope Francis filling in a couple of those spots. The most notable of this new, just the ones who were appointed yesterday. The first is the new Archbishop of Cincinnati. So that was marking the retirement of Archbishop Dennis Schnurr, who'd been there again for many years. He was probably well known for church watchers, as he had long been an official with the USCCB. And he's been replaced now by as a new archbishop by an auxiliary bishop from Chicago, Bishop Robert Casey. And so again, that Schnurr had been there since 2009, and previously been the Bishop of Duluth. In the case of now Archbishop-elect Casey, he's a priest of Chicago. He studied at the Loyola University. He also had a Master of Divinity degree from the University of St. Mary of the Lake, and held a variety of positions in the Archdiocese of Chicago over the last decade or so. So this is somebody who comes from a very large archdiocese indeed, and his appointment has been sort of within the span of service of Cardinal Blaise Cupich as the Archbishop of Chicago. The others were both priests, I believe. One will be going to Sioux City as a successor to Bishop Ralph Walker Nicholas. And that's Father John Keener, I think I'm saying his name correctly, who's a priest in the Diocese of Youngstown, Ohio. And then the other is actually currently serving as, or was, the Vicar General of the Diocese of Worcester, Massachusetts, and that's Monsignor Richard Reedy. He's been appointed to the Diocese of Norwich, Connecticut. What is, again, interesting here is that we're seeing these smaller dioceses, so this again is fairly typical, that in any way casting dispersions upon the smaller dioceses, but you'll see priests who will be promoted to these smaller dioceses directly from serving as a priest or a monsignor into that role, and then as time passes, some, not all, of course, will move up to a larger archdiocese. So, again, there's nothing unusual at all about these appointments. One thing that I will say that is especially interesting about Monsignor Reedy is that he is somebody with an extensive educational background. He was a student at the Pontifical North American College in Rome. He has a doctorate in sacred theology from the Gregorian University, and also studied at the University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum in Rome. So he has pastoral experience, but he has been especially active as Vicar General and moderator of the Curia, and also as defender of the bond, having received also a licentiate in canon law from the Catholic University of
I was going to bring that up. I was pretty sure he had a... Is there anything he hasn't done?
That's right. So, there has, and this points to something that is kind of interesting. This is my apologies to your listeners because this might seem a little inside baseball, but there has been this working assumption that Pope Francis doesn't like to appoint people who have worked in chancery offices, who have held positions like Vicar General, or who have a lot of degrees, Rome-based degrees. Actually, this simply disproves, as always, the assumptions we make about Pope Francis.
He's always going to throw us those curveballs if we're talking about inside baseball. My guest, Dr. Matthew Bunson, who is Vice President, Editorial Director of EWTN News, himself widely educated. And we are talking about church news and current events in light of church teaching. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
On the next Epiphany.
Open our hearts, O Lord, to listen to the words of your Son. Hi, Vanessa Denhagarmo here. We welcome Dr. Mae Bluestein for our Faith at Work Friday segment. And Deanna Cortez from Catholic Funeral and Cemetery Services is going to tell us about a free workshop to help with end-of-life planning.
Epiphany, weekdays at noon. And be sure to catch past episodes in our archive at AveMariaRadio.net.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
My daughter told me she was published in a scientific journal as an undergrad. I'm so proud of her. The world needs Catholic physicists, and my daughter's going to be one of them.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Dr. Matthew Bunson is continuing this conversation with us. We're talking about current events in light of church teachings and church news. So we just talked about 3 newly appointed bishops to U.S. dioceses. And Matthew, just to round off that point you were making, it is funny. There was a lot of speculation about the fact, well, Pope Francis doesn't seem to favor those who've gone on to get advanced degrees in theology or canon law. He doesn't favor those who work in chanceries. And then we get 3 in a row. So, we never really know what to expect with the Francis papacy.
Well, that's right. And it tells you that Pope Francis is always less concerned necessarily about the whopping number of degrees and things, what he's looking for. And he has said this himself. He said 2 things. First, that very famous phrase that he wants priests to have the smell of the sheep.
Right.
But at the same time, he, as he likes to put it, he doesn't want ideological bishops. So, and that's taken that he doesn't want bishops who are overly political or who hold these very ideological positions. He wants pastors at heart.
Right.
And even if you work in a chancery, well, let's put it this way, Pope John Paul II, who was one of the truly great pastoral popes, but people don't necessarily see it that way or think of it that way, he was profoundly pastoral, and yet he had a long academic career. And then was appointed an auxiliary, and then as the Archbishop of Krakow, and then a cardinal and Archbishop of Krakow, and then, of course, his election. As the Archbishop of Krakow, he dealt with so many pastoral issues because of communism, because of the challenges that it posed to his flock. So it's always very dangerous to make assumptions that simply because somebody works in the chancery that they're not pastoral, and I think that's something that Francis is trying to make a point about.
Yeah. I think you raise a really crucial point. I always think about John Paul II as a very deeply pastoral man because I know the history, but I see what you mean, that his magnum opus with the theology of the body can probably eclipse that great pastoral heritage he has, and that can probably be said about a lot of these bishop-elects and a lot of priests as well. So kudos to the Holy Father for always looking for fatherly pastoral men to take over the seas.
Yeah, that's right. And we saw similar realities with Pope Benedict XVI, who was arguably one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century, but who also had the deep heart of a pastor. You can see that, interestingly enough, in a book like Jesus of Nazareth, where he brings our Lord down to a level that anyone can understand, but then has very important pastoral applications for it.
Yeah. So let's switch gears. I want to talk about some happy news before we talk about Pope Francis's recent document. Marc Fogel, his family, the Rosary and the Faith, sustaining them through his detainment in Russia. This is a true story of hope for all of us in the United States.
Yeah, it is. So he was an American school teacher. He had been detained, to put it politely, in Russia for, 3 years?
Yeah.
And through the work, I know, of the Trump administration, through the U.S. government, was released and was able to come home. And his mom, and this is, I appreciate that you wanted to talk about this, because this is kudos
it's a powerful story.
EWTN News Nightly, because his 95-year-old mother, Malphine, was able to appear as a guest on News Nightly. And her comments, I thought, were really striking, that, as she put it, they tried throughout to be praying at the same time as her son. So, in other words, he said, at 9:30 at night, they always prayed the Rosary simultaneously. And he said she was firmly convinced that it helped all of us, and especially Marc. And credit to this nuntagenarian, or octogenarian at the time, or just, in her 90s, for just the determination, what it took to get her son back. And what is interesting, one of the details that really was striking was that her son, who is clearly a devout Catholic, was allowed to go to a chapel during his time of incarceration. And he would have been the first to say that prayer was one of the things that really sustained him during this. But it's a reminder, too, that as terrible as situations can seem, that they talk about the power of prayer. Well, we're seeing it in front of us, but it takes that trust in the darkest of moments to recognize that, no, this is when we turn to prayer the most. But at the same time, it's that trust that however this turns out, that we are accepting of it, but we still work very hard to bring our loved ones home and to provide them the care that they're going to need.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, sheer testimony to the power of prayer, and prayer in solidarity with a loved one who's suffering. But one bit of trivia that I think many of our listeners would be interested in, that I think very few people know, Malphine was slated to speak on the day of the Butler, Pennsylvania near assassination, the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. Had he not been shot, she would have taken the stage. I believe it would have been after him, right? Almost immediately after him?
Yes, I believe so, yeah. Yeah, she was expected to appear. That's exactly right. But as she said to on EWTN News Nightly, that she met with Trump just before he took the stage, and that he did give her a promise that he would do everything he could to bring her son home. So her mission was accomplished, clearly. Yeah. But here are those connections that we can see, because it's very obvious for those who follow the campaign that whether you supported him or not, whether you voted for him or not, the assassination attempt did have a very profound effect on who's now the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Yeah, and a small bit of trivia too. She pulled out all the stops, even attempting to sue the United States government just to get her son back. So God bless them for this reunion, and thank God that this has taken place. So shifting gears here, it's no surprise to everyone that Pope Francis has issued this statement in a recent letter to the U.S. bishops about his concern about President Donald Trump's deportation choices and so immigration policy. Let's just address that.
Well, that's right. So he issued a letter to the U.S. bishops. This is issued on the 10th of this month, in which he reiterates his position, certainly where it regards immigration. And the couple of points I think he's making, the first is that he is very concerned as Pope about what he sees as the deportation plans on the part of the Trump administration, what he refers to as a major crisis. and talks about the fact that, as he puts it, the rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. But then he does talk about this. One must recognize the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe from those who have committed violent or serious crimes while in the country or prior to arrival. So this is a restatement in many ways of classic Catholic social teaching. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, when I read through this, it does not require an immense amount of imagination to have seen something similar, phrased differently perhaps with different emphases, coming from someone like Pope Benedict XVI. Mm-hmm. We know because he had very similar things to say throughout his pontificate. But the point also that Francis is making is that he talks about the act of deporting people who in many cases have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, etc., damages the dignity of many women and men and entire families and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness. So I would refer everyone to a piece from Father Raymond de Souza, because one of the points that he is trying to make in his interpretation of this is that Francis isn't demanding open borders, but instead he's condemning what he calls a closing of the heart to immigrants and a denigration of their dignity and the political exploitation of their plight. So the point that Father de Souza is making, I think it's a very good one, is that the conflict, for example, between the Holy Father and J.D. Vance on the whole, I know you've talked about this, the Ordo Amoris, is likely more about language than theology. And I think that's a key point to make, because I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Vance, about the Holy Father, and the Ordo Amoris in the coming weeks.
Yep. I don't think I've seen a time when the United States government and the Vatican has been in this kind of dialogue as we're seeing now, or as much. My guest, Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News. We've been talking about current events in light of church teachings and church news. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Welcome to Advanced Dentistry Center family. This is Dr. Metti, and our team strives to treat you like family in a loving and compassionate way as we focus on serving you in a Christ-like manner. We do this by emphasizing prevention and general well-being for a lifetime. Our private practice is small, personal, state-of-the-art, and innovative, with the goal to educate and motivate our patients in improving their oral health. It is through a partnership with you that you will achieve the goals for your smile. Advanced Dentistry is serious about the level of care we provide, with attention to details and an exceptional level of care, skill, and judgment. We are thrilled for the opportunity to serve you.
Dr. Matty and the team invite you to visit them at advanceddentistrycenter.com or call them at 248-594-9592. That's 248-594-9592. AdvancedDentistryCenter.com. The Heart of the Interior Life with Elizabeth Jingle.
In Rule 2 of St. Ignatius of Loyola's teaching on the discernment of spirits, he describes the characteristics of a person whose fundamental spiritual direction of their lives is directed towards God. He writes, in persons who are going on intensely purifying their sins and rising from good to better in the service of God our Lord. St. Ignatius is describing persons who love God intensely and want to live their lives in conformity to His will. These persons frequent the sacrament of reconciliation, sin is being uprooted, and virtue is flourishing. They are striving to grow in holiness and are giving more of their time to the service of the Lord. With attentive care to the spiritual life, the person portrayed in Rule 2 is the image of the growing and maturing Christian. Is there an area in your life that needs to rise from good to better? Grace awaits.
For more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Joining me as he does every month to talk about the devotion of the month is our friend Steve Ray, pilgrimage leader. He has made so many trips to the Holy Land, I've lost count, and he's a prolific author and preacher of the Scriptures and Catholic convert. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
You're very welcome, Marcus. I love coming in here, and I love our conversations before and after the show as well, but glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, the devotion of February is to the Holy Family.
Yep.
And we all have this beautiful image of the Holy Family. Most of us have them in our home, right? So but how do they maintain their soft complexions and their slender figures? Like, how did they do that?
Well, this is the month of the Holy Family, and some say also the boyhood of Jesus. So but that's together, you know. But I know you're asking about how do they keep their wonderful complexion. We were joking about that before the show started because we have a picture here of Joseph and Mary and Jesus, and we're just saying, is Jesus there a boy or a girl? It's not quite sure. He's got the blonde hair, and he's wearing pink. And the face there, it's uncertain. And I'm not making, I am making fun of it in a way, but my point is that the imagery that we have of the Holy Family makes them look very European.
Right.
And they weren't. They were Middle Eastern. They would have had dark hair and dark skin and dark eyes, like yours. I mean, you have dark eyes.
Right.
And I've got blue eyes and no hair, but you know, Jesus has blonde hair, Joseph kind of the same. And my point is that the real family, and that's why we're doing this today, to talk about the real Holy Family. And they would not have looked like a lot of these pictures. Joseph was a hardworking guy. He would have, you always see him with holding a flower with his little, lotion soft hands. But Joseph would have been a tough guy. We hear that they're carpenters, but not carpenters like we may think of today, because in the biblical language of Greek, it's tekton, Tekton, and it means one who works with hard materials. In other words, somebody that's working hard all day with their hands. Another way you could say it is a guy with calluses.
Yep.
A guy with muscles. I jokingly, when I give talks in the year of St. Joseph, I think I gave talks at every St. Joseph church in the United States. It seemed like it anyway on St. Joseph. And I oftentimes at men's conferences, and I'd say Joseph could have picked any one of you guys up and thrown you down and pinned you to the floor in 2 seconds.
Easily.
Because he was a man of steel. My favorite picture of Joseph was painted by Tissot. And it's of him just with rugged clothes on, dark skin, dark face, and he's slender but muscular. In the times of the first century, there was a city being built about an hour's walk away from Nazareth called Sepphoris. And the Romans were building this major capital city. And they were bringing in skilled and unskilled labor from all over the area. And Joseph and the Holy Family living in a little village of Nazareth, which was about 25 caves they found, small village, maybe not more than 2, at the most 3 acres in size. And there was not a lot of work there.
Right.
And anybody that's a salesman or a tradesman knows that in order to get work, you have to have a customer base, which means that sometimes you have to go out of your own little village to find it. Well, this was a big construction site going on during the time of Jesus' childhood and boyhood. And my guess was that, and many believe this, is that they would have crossed over the hillside and down into Sepphoris. And it was a city made not with wood, but it was made out of stone. This is what there's a lot of. Yeah. It's called Jerusalem limestone. And even today, when we drive our buses around Nazareth, it's kind of on a hillside. You have to go around through Cana and up sometimes around Mount of Transfiguration to get there. But you see the hillsides being cut away with hydraulic equipment. They're cutting Jerusalem limestone out of the hills even today. And when you go to Sepphoris, which we do at times with our groups, I say any of these stones in this walkway, any of these walls, these stones that are in the theater that they were sitting, could have been placed there by Jesus and Joseph. I envisioned them walking for an hour with other men in Nazareth because others would have gone as well. Yeah. And so I always wonder when they walked there, because I've run back and forth between Nazareth and Sepphoris and Nazareth and Cana back and forth to kind of get a feel for the where they would have walked, what it would have been like in their time. When it's sometimes very hot, too. But I always wonder, what did Jesus and Joseph talk about as they walked along for an hour together? Did they walk with all the other men, or did they stay by themselves? I think they walked with everybody else, and they were just good old guys. Right. And did Joseph teach Jesus along the way, or did Jesus teach Joseph along the way? I just love to think about those things when I'm walking there in the morning and hearing the same birds that they heard and the same trees that they saw. But when they get there, I envision somebody giving them a hammer and a chisel and pointing over to a pile of all kinds of different shapes of rock and say, these have to be shaped 1 cubit by 1 cubit by 1 cubit. And your task is to get 30 of those done today or whatever it is. And the rest of the day, Jesus and Joseph are chink, 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 chipping away at these huge pieces of rock to shape them so that they could be placed into the roadway or into the walls. And then noon they'd hear the whistle blow and they'd get a chance to eat some smoked fish and barley bread that Mary sent along with them. Why do I say barley bread? Well, there was 2 main grains, wheat and barley. Wheat was finer and it was more the superior grain, and it was mainly for the wealthy people. Right. Barley was cheaper, more bran and coarse, but could grow in more rough areas, but it was the poor food for the animals too. Remember the poor boy that brought Jesus the loaves and fish in John chapter 6? That was barley bread that he brought them. And so I can imagine them. Mary had given them a bag lunch, and they sat and they ate their smoked fish that was caught in the Sea of Galilee and smoked in Magdala. And they had it up in Nazareth that they could buy, and then they would get some water from there and have the barley bread and fish, and they would eat, and then they'd be back to work again until they saw the sun going down. They would each get a silver denarius in the palm of their hand, because the New Testament, we learn in the Gospels that was a day's wages was a silver denarius with the image of the emperor on it. And they would come, then they'd hike back. They'd got an hour walk back. So say they're working 8 to 10 hours and then an hour walking both ways. They get back home, they're exhausted, their muscles are sore. What do they do when they get home? Well, Mary's got dinner ready for them. Something very simple. They ate a lot of lentils and figs and nuts and dates and things like that, and they didn't have meat because meat was way too expensive. Yes. I think they ate sparrows because even Jesus said, "Don't you buy 2 sparrows for a penny?" Why would anybody buy a sparrow? But even today, sparrows are kosher foods for Jews to eat. Yep. They could eat those, and it's just enough to flavor the food. So then they would eat leeks and vegetables, and we know that they had certain herbs like cumin and because Jesus mentions those. So they'd have a simple dinner, and then they'd do their prayers, and they'd fall asleep on the mats. Yeah. Did they open up their prayer books and read from those? No, there were no books back then. They only had scrolls, but they couldn't have afforded a scroll. Exactly. They were made out of animal skins, and it cost 3 years' wages to have your own Bible from up until
absolutely.
Paper was invented and just recently. But they would listen to them in the synagogue when Jesus had said that he went back to his native place, which was Nazareth. And he went up in the Sabbath and he rolled the scrolls. They handed him the scrolls. He rolled the scrolls and he read Isaiah and then he sat. Yeah. But people think that means, he's got done. He went back and sat in the pews. No, that's how Jewish rabbis taught, because Moses took his seat to judge the people. So the synagogues all had a chair of Moses. And that chair represented Moses' authority. Jesus would have sat in that chair, and from that chair he would speak authoritatively.
Right.
And he rolled the scrolls, and then he put the scrolls away. But even it was hard for some synagogues to get scrolls because they were so expensive. All made of animal skin, had to be handwritten. They didn't have ink pens. In fact, I just realized the other day that the word ink, it's used 3 times in the Bible. The word ink is really the word black. It is not a word for ink. It's just said, and then I took that's read and black.
Right.
And I wrote to you.
Right. My guest, Steve Ray, we're talking about the intricacies of the life of the Holy Family of Nazareth, as this month we in the church honor the devotion to the Holy Family and the boyhood of Jesus Christ. Stay tuned as we continue this conversation. I'm Marcus Peter.
Ann Arbor Smiles is a state-of-the-art dental practice led by the talents of Doctors Dan Kennedy, Chris Marzoni, and Stephen Gray. One of their many satisfied patients is Father Deacon Lawrence Hendricks.
I was one of the first patients to receive a CEREC crown from Dr. Kennedy. The CEREC technology allows for restorations to be done in one visit. They always use the most advanced techniques in dentistry. I've always enjoyed the friendly staff and the personal relationships that I have at Ann Arbor Smiles.
Go to AnnArborSmiles.com today.
Hi, I'm Ed Bahura, and at Sylvan Learning Centers, we know how hard you work to provide children with the education they deserve. As a leading provider of supplemental K-12 education, we partner with schools supporting students during the school day or after school. Our proven programs are designed to elevate student success and improve school ratings with measurable results. Join the many schools already benefiting from Sylvan Learning institutional tutoring. Call 1-800-EDUCATE.
Teaches that Jesus Christ is literally and wholly present, body and blood, soul and divinity, under the appearances of bread and wine. In the Bread of Life discourse documented in John chapter 6, Jesus states that he is the bread of life, and that his flesh is true food and his blood true drink. The Jews were scandalized in verse 52. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? Jesus does not back down, but reiterates this teaching 4 more times over the next 4 verses. Many left in verse 66 because this teaching was truly difficult. But at no point does Jesus water down his teaching and call them back. No, he allows them to leave, and even questions his 12 apostles if they too wish to leave. Jesus intended to be understood literally, and the Jews, apostles, and the Catholic Church absolutely take him at his word. Examining the truth of the Catholic faith, this is faithforensics.org.
It's time for Family Man with Dr. Gregory Popchak.
Good family discussions don't just happen, they take time. Family talk rituals help families be intentional about making real conversations happen. You need to be intentional if you want to get past exchanges like, "What'd you do in school today?" "Nothing." Believe it or not, when the relationship between parents and kids is healthy, kids naturally want to open up to mom and dad. Kids want to know that their parents care enough to take time to listen and to understand how they're feeling and what they're going through. When parents make time to listen first, kids are more likely to willingly receive what mom and dad have to say. That's why family talk rituals are an important part of Catholic family life. To discover more ways your family can celebrate the liturgy of domestic church life, check out the newest editions of Parenting with Grace and visit CatholicCounselors.com. I'm Dr. Greg Popchak, but you can call me Family Man.
To discover more ways faith can enrich your life, visit CatholicCounselors.com.
When your children consider going to college, where are you going to find a place that will prepare them for the future and build on the foundation that you've laid? The answer? Ave Maria University. With an authentically Catholic curriculum, including 35 majors, AMU prepares students to take on the world.
I've seen the difference in my son since he's been at Ave Maria. He's happy, he's excited about what he's going to do with his degree, and he's living his faith.
Learn more at avemaria.edu. That's avemaria.edu.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. My guest, Steve Ray, and we are expounding what the scriptures have to say about the Holy Family and the life of the Holy Family living in Nazareth. So, Steve, we've established that, first of all, a lot of the imagery we have of the Holy Family really doesn't do justice to who they were and how they lived. But also, something that you and I talked about during the break, we take for granted. When our families gather together, everyone pulls out their prayer book. There's no way the Holy Family would have done that.
They didn't have paper back then. The paper is something recently invented, and printing presses only recently in the 1800s invented. Or I should say, during the time of Martin Luther, they were printing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that we superimpose back onto that age. Yeah. Just like I always ask people when we're over there and we're at the House of the Holy Family, and I give my talk that's called A Day in the Life of the Holy Family. We kind of go through their day. What is the first thing the Holy Family did in the morning when they woke up? Everybody says, pray. And I said, is that the first thing you do in the morning? And they go, well, no, we go to the bathroom. And so did they, I said. So you live in a cave. Where do you go? And we talk about it. They didn't have the porcelain toilets that we have, or the privacy that we have.
Or plumbing and running water like we do.
Or toilet paper even. Right. I mean, it's very, very different. You know, the funny thing is that even when we started going to the Middle East back in 1995 as our first time, a lot of the places in the Middle East didn't have sit-down toilets. They just had a hole in the ground where you had a place to put your feet, and then you squatted over the hole.
Right.
And my wife and I still laugh about this, that when they started putting toilets in places like in Turkey, that they put a toilet and people were standing up on the toilets.
Oh, balancing?
Yeah, they thought they had to stand like they did before.
Right.
And there were signs that said, do not stand on the toilet, and it would show a picture of sitting on the toilet, so people realized you used to stand and squat over the hole. They would get up on the toilet seat and stand.
Right.
But that's because up until even in our lifetime, people at many places in the Middle East today, I guarantee, when we went to Iraq, most of the toilets are holes in the ground, even 5 years ago. So we superimpose our way of life on them, and it's really not that way. For example, you get up in the morning here, and you go turn on the water faucet, and you get a drink, and you make your coffee. But they didn't have a water faucet back then. The nearest water source for Mary and Jesus and Joseph was 15 minutes walk away.
Right.
It was a well, and it's still there. The water is still coming out today. It's under the Greek Orthodox Church. They built it over that well. But there's also the well of Mary where it came down. Anyway, that's another whole story. But they would have Mary, and it was a woman's job to go get water. And so Mary would have to get, after I think she sent her guys off to work, they would pray and do their prayers. And they had ritual prayers just like we do today. They had readings from the books and so on. And they would all the Jewish people would have the same prayers and readings that they would memorize together. And then after that, they would eat something simple, and then they would go off to work. And then Mary's job was to go to the well and get water. Yeah. And she'd go again in the evening, both because it's cool in the morning and in the evening. And that was the girls' jobs to go. So I always say to the girls in our group, we always have families that go with us. And I say to the young girls, do you think Mary and the other girls liked going to the well to get the water every day, twice a day? And they go, no, kind of like, no. And I said, I think they did, because who else was at the well? All the other girls. And they didn't have iPhones with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. If they wanted to talk to each other, they met each other at the well. Men found their wives at the well.
That's right.
Because the women all went to the well twice a day. Jacob found his wife there. Moses found his wife there. So this is, and even Jesus, kind of in a way, you could say, found a wife there with the woman at the well and at Samaria, because she became a follower of his. So this is, the life was so different back then. And I do a whole talk on this, the whole aspect of their life from morning till night. And I think it makes us love them more. It does me anyway. I appreciate them more for their rugged. I think probably the word that we would use compared to ours is rugged. It was a very rugged, primitive kind of a life.
Yeah, and so despite that primitiveness, and that was the reality of the time. That's the thing we need to acknowledge, that this was how everyone lived. And we have sanitized our concept of how they lived in a lot of ways. One of the ways in which we do that is, I think we seem to think that the Holy Family lived a life so holy that it's unrealistic, when in reality they lived real lives in very holy ways, and that's why they're such a model for us.
In some way, there's this very puritanical piety that makes us think that if someone's holy, that they have blonde hair, or this is the kind of pictures that we see. Saints had problems like we did. Mary got bit by mosquitoes the same way we do. This is the Holy Family. They had this. They lived a very rugged, tough life.
Right.
And
like it's tough for us to think about, but Jesus and Joseph walking to work, one of them tripped on a muddy puddle, stuff like that happened,
and they'd get sunburned.
Right.
I mean, they're holy, but even when we see images, I understand, by the way, Marcus, why we have images of Mary and Jesus like this, because art is not supposed to just show you what your eye sees. It's trying to also bring out the inner qualities of things. All the time, art is trying to bring out what you can't see, the inner qualities. And so you make Mary and Jesus look very pious and things to show their holiness and their devoutness and so on. Although Mary would not be dressed in blue.
Of course not.
See, this is something in this picture here. Jesus is in pink. Brown. Joseph's probably not bad. It's brown, but Mary's dressed in blue and white. First of all, anybody bleaching clothes or keeping that would be very expensive to do. Blue and scarlet and purple were for royalty because they didn't have dyes like we do today. The blue and purple scarlet dyes came from mollusks, those animals that live in the sea, like mussels that we eat, and they would get them from their shells. Lydia in Philippi was she made purple fabric. She was from Thyatira, and she made purple fabrics, and because of that, she was probably a very wealthy woman and put up Paul and the family there. But that was something that was sold only to wealthy people that could afford to have the purple dyes in their clothes. So mainly it was for kings and royalty, and some of the priests in the temple had those colors because of the dignity of being God, the King of the universe's house. They had these colors, but not in everyday life. Your clothes would be the color of natural wool or natural flax. They didn't really have cotton. It was wool and flax. And it would be a beige color. And you'd wash it by hand in a river or a stream. And so it never really, if you have a white shirt and you wash it every day in a stream or a river, it's not going to be bright white anymore after a while. Even if I wash my white shirt with my blue jeans, it's not white. but the colors that you've got a purple shirt on today, and I've got a very red flannel shirt. But these colors wouldn't have existed for them back then. It would have been very drab.
And in fact, bleaching was unrealistic because it was just going to get dirty the next day anyway. So it was expensive and unrepeatable. So when you think about them living in this hardy way, we also still have to talk about the fact that they chose virtue. Normal, in some sense, like they were elevated, like Mary was particularly chosen, immaculately conceived. Christ is the Son of God. But they chose virtue. These were real people living real lives, and they chose virtue.
And Jesus could have, being the second person of the Trinity, choosing his mother when he comes down. He obviously chose the Father, and chose the woman who's going to be his mother, and the Father who's going to adopt him. But he could have been born into a palace, and he could have said, "You know what? I'd really like to wait until the 20th century. It'll be a whole lot more comfortable there, and I don't have to worry about being born in a stable. I could be born in a hospital, and mom, I'd like my mom to have running water." But they chose to come at that time in that very primitive time. Probably because the Greek language was everywhere because of Alexander the Great, and there were 250,000 miles of primary roads, so Paul, with his Roman passport, could go all over and speak the language in the gospel. That's why I think it says in the fullness of time God sent His Son. It was a time. A lot of things conjoined with the Jewish people and with the Romans, everything. It all was the right timing. But still, he decided to come as a helpless babe in a manger, born to a poor family. This is not a wealthy family. This was a relatively poor family. Because when they went to the presentation, which we just celebrated, they're supposed to bring a lamb. But a lamb is expensive. So there was a provision made for the poorest of the people. Well, if you can't bring a lamb, we'll allow you poor people to bring 2 pigeons. Just go find the kids who snare them on the side of the road with the sparrows, get 2 for a penny, and take those doves, and you can use those instead. And Joseph was not a wealthy man. He would have brought a lamb if he could. When they said that he was a righteous man, that word righteous is not just that he was a good guy. It means righteousness according to the law. Yes. He was blameless according to the law. That's what the righteousness was Mosaic legal righteousness. And he would have obeyed the law to the nth degree. And he would have brought a lamb, but he couldn't afford a lamb, so he brought turtle doves. That tells you a lot about the Holy Family right there. It tells you a lot.
And Joseph's righteousness is the very reason why he decided to spare Mary's life. In fact, we can also argue that because he was so righteous and connected to the Lord that way, he recognized the work of the divine in Mary's pregnancy. Yeah. And because of that, he tries to divorce her in secret, and then recognizes the angel's voice and embraces the reality of being Jesus' true legal father.
Right, and the angel said it's not by any hanky-panky that she's pregnant. This is by the Holy Spirit. Right. And he obviously didn't know that, or the angel wouldn't have had to tell him. Yep. So the angel made a point, and Luke makes a point of telling us that. Matthew makes a point of telling us that it was told that. And so, but you're absolutely correct. This is a very rustic family living in a very rustic time, but God chose this family. He chose the time. And they didn't live in Jerusalem among the wealthy. No. The priests there, like John the Baptist, Father Zechariah, he would serve in the temple, but the temple would just smell bad in Jerusalem. They've got these high walls. There's no plumbing. Yeah, it's animals are everywhere, and it's 90 or 100 degrees. Can you imagine what it smelled like? But the wealthy people lived out on the countryside. The priests, the Holy Family lived in a cave.
My guest, Steve Ray, we've been talking about the blessing of the Holy Family. They were people like you and I, and they chose grace. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.